Hello, my name is Leo and welcome to a new very quick tutorial by Blauw Films. Today we will be looking at how to composite some stars into your nighttime shots. I feel like this is a pretty common request when it comes to quick visual effects jobs, or if you have shot something and you want to make it a little bit more flashy or just a little bit more dramatic, adding stars is a very economical way to do that. So before we get into this tutorial, I would like to say thank you very much for all the viewers. Thank you very much for sticking around to this channel, and I've really been enjoying the growth that we've been getting here. So be sure to hit the subscribe button. There will be some very cool lighting tutorials coming up soon with Eric, and the first post-production tutorial with Gabby, our editor, will be out sometime next week as well. I got this shot over here from a short film that I did some visual effects for. I believe it's already been 2 years ago. This is a romantic comedy drama. We have a very slow tilt up and then we reveal the London sky. Now, as usual, when you're shooting these kinds of scenes, you probably won't be able to see any stars simply due to the exposure time on your camera or the sensitivity you have your camera set to. Now, you want to make sure you have your actors correctly exposed, so even though there's probably a lot of smog going on in this sky over here, you would probably have to be adding the stars in post anyways. Now, if you're working with a locked off shot, you can skip the next step, which is 3D tracking this, and you can go straight into compositing your stars. But we are going to do a little bit of motion tracking beforehand. Before we get into the motion tracking, I would like to show you the star assets that we will be using. If you come to our ArtStation store over here and then go to the store tab, there is this product called 100 Organic Starfields Pack. All of these star maps are EXR files, so they have a pretty high dynamic range, and they are all created using photos of real stars. Now that might sound a bit crazy, but basically we're working on a science fiction film, Syntactic Labyrinths, and I needed a lot of variation when it came to my Starfields. And I went through this process of taking one of these NASA images that has a very complex cluster of stars. And then in Photoshop, I created a luminance mask that basically creates a selection around each one of these little dots of bright light. And then afterwards, I ran a script that would then create a separate layer for each one of those selections, as long as it had a, let's say, 6 pixel threshold between one selection and the other. What you get then is actually pretty cool. So if we go into this folder over here, this is the Starfields backplates folder from the product over here. And I got this other folder, which are my single stars that I then repopulated in 3D space with a randomizer. Have a look at all these single stars. They're just a 2 to 6, 7 pixel variation of a few different shades of gray, a few different shades of blue, and together they create a star. Either way, let's get into doing this shot, and then I can show you a few cool tricks of how to properly composite these stars. Now, first of all, we need to track this scene. I tried tracking this in After Effects, but there's not too much to track except for these bright lights over here. So we're in Cinema 4D right now. We have a new sequence, and what you want to do first of all is by hitting Command D, you get your project settings down here, and you want to make sure that you have the same frame rate as your footage, which if we go to After Effects, we can see down here that it's 25, so we're matching that with 25 down here. The next thing is going up to Tracker and selecting Motion Tracker, and this is where you can import your footage. Now I have this image sequence over here, which is just a simple JPEG sequence, and I'm just going to hit Open. Now it should automatically give you a frame start and a frame stop. And if we scroll through this, you can see the beautiful looking preview of our shot. Now the next thing you want to do is you want to go here to 2D tracking. And number of tracks, we're going to let this set the default right now. And I'm going to say create auto tracks. And now I'm going to go and hit auto track. Cool. Our 2D track is finished. If we scroll through the footage, you can see that we have these tracking markers locking on pretty nicely until we get to the end over here. Now, as your shot will probably be completely different than mine, let's move into this already solved camera that I have over here. As you can see, the camera goes up, and then we have all these little tracking points that are representing the geometry of our scene. So now we're gonna just save this as a Cinema 4D file, which we can then import into our project window on the left over here, and then drag it right into our composition, right on top of our footage. If I turn that on, you'll see we have our tracking markers solidly matching with the footage behind it. So now things start to get interesting. What we can do now is, with the Cinema 4D layer selected, we have this Cineware effect over here. And the only thing we really have to do is hit extract with the Cinema 4D camera selected, and we will get this solved camera, which is the solved camera from our motion tracker in Cinema 4D. Now, basically what we have now is we have a 3D scene. We can turn off the Cinema 4D layer, and we have a 3D scene that we can now start positioning our star assets in. Now, the next thing I want to do is I'm going to move kind of somewhere towards the end of the shot. And I have a few layers that I've created to make sure that this shot starts working correctly. First of all, over here on layer 2, I have created a duplicate of our backplate, and I have simply, with the pen tool, rotoed out this section of the building. Now, that just makes it easier to make sure that our stars will never be crossing the foreground. I just have a feather of 15 pixels because we are a little bit out of focus. As you can see on the trees over here, our focus stays on the characters even as camera starts pushing up. You can see on the trees and on the building that we never push the focus to infinity. This is also something we have to account for when adding our stars. Now, the next layer I have over here is just a very rough roto that goes across the shot. And I'm just taking a section of the sky because the sky is so smoggy right now. We want to make sure that we don't introduce too many stars all over the place. So I have this very janky mask over here with a feather of 260 pixels. If I solo that out, you'll kind of be able to see what it is. It's just a little bit of that sky that we're overlaying on top to make sure that the intensity stayed down. Now, the next thing I have over here is a duplicate of the shot. Nothing special, I didn't do anything to it, I just kept it to normal and I lowered the opacity to 40%. Basically, if you have this one together with the other one, you're really creating a exclusion in the sky. And then we have our building right on top, and that should be everything we need to exclude all of our stars. Cool, perfect. Let's unsolo these layers, and we can start layering some star assets. I'm just gonna go into my Starfields pack, and I'm just gonna go, let's say, from 20 all the way to 34 and import them all. Now, what I will do is I'm gonna start with one, and then I'm just gonna be replacing them. I have dragged it into our composition. I'm gonna click this to make it 3D. So I'm just gonna go to position. I'm going to see the Z axis is this one, the third one. I'm just gonna say 50,000. Now 50,000 usually is a pretty nice value to make sure it feels as if it's really far away in the sky. Put 50,000 back there. And now what we can do, I'm just quickly going to go to my rotation tools and angle it downwards a little bit. And I'm going to scale it up. For this, it's important for you to, once in a while, have a look outside, have a look at the stars to kind of get a feeling for what the scale would be. To me, this feels like an accurate scale. Now, the next thing you just need to do is go to set the track mode to add, and you are a little bit closer to done. I'm going to move this layer down in the hierarchy to be just underneath all of our smoggy fog layers. And now you can kind of see the difference, what those smog layers do. Cool. Now there are a few things we need to do to make this work. So first of all, I have motion blur checked over here, and then we can turn on motion blur right here for that layer. Now the next thing we need to do, we need to use some kind of light meter to know how much intensity these stars should actually have. A way that I like to go about this is I look at my shot, and ideally on a VFX project, I would ask the DP to mark down all of his camera settings for whatever shot requires VFX. But in this case, we're just going to be guessing. I'm just going to go into Cinema 4D over here, start a new project, and I'm going to add a plane. Let's just say it's 1920 by 1080. And basically what we're going to be doing is we're going to use a CG camera and our render engine of choice to be our light meter. And inside of the camera settings, here's where we're going to start guessing some things. I'm assuming it's a night shoot, so the ISO would be either native 800 or something a bit higher. If we look at the shot itself, it looks a little bit noisy, so I'm just going to go for 1600. Now for the shutter speed, the shot being at 25 frames per second, I'm assuming it would be 50. And for the f-stop, they are managing to get a pretty nice shallow depth of field over here. So I'm assuming it would be anywhere below 6.3. So let's say 5.6, and that should be fine. Now afterwards, I'm going to enable sharpening, enable depth of field. We have a bladed aperture of 7 blades, seems to be. Now I'm gonna come into here and create a light material, and I'm gonna assign one of our star maps to that light slot. Place my focus over there and hit render. Cool, there you go. So now we are able to see how bright these stars should be for these exact camera settings. So I'm gonna go back into After Effects, and let me see, let's take that EXR pass and drag it right over our composition. And now, if you look over here at the top right corner of our screen, we have this RGB alpha value chart. And it's basically giving us a luminance value based on a number. So what we can do is we're just gonna go right here and pick this bright star over here. And we're seeing that our values up there are around the 68, 72, and 76. Now we're gonna do the same thing over here. Let's pick a nice one. This looks like a good one. And we can see our values are at 70. This one is at 64, 64, 38. All right, well, it seems as if our stars are matching the brightness values pretty accurately. Now, what I would like to do, give them a little bit of a blur. I'm gonna go to Effects, then Blur and Sharpen, Camera Lens Blur. Look at that. All right, so we don't need to check Repeat Edge Pixels. And now we're gonna try to match the blur intensity that we have on the shot. We don't really have too much reference except for, I guess, this little blur over here and some of these highlights in between some of these leaves. So I think we're gonna go a little bit higher to a 7. That seems to be the value we are after. Now, if you were to be shooting on an anamorphic lens, you could bring down this aspect ratio to something like 0.5. And then as you can see, we have created a vertical bokeh. Now, right now, we don't actually need that, so I'm gonna keep the aspect ratio to 1. The one thing you can actually change is bring the hexagon up to heptagon, because we have assumed that our shot is using a 7-bladed lens, which is something that we don't actually know. But either way, let's go with it. I'm gonna trim the layer, holding Shift to snap. And then the next thing we can do is start adding and layering a few more of these star plates. Back at the project, I'm just going to say, let's see, we have 14 of these. So I'm duplicating this layer a few times. And now I'm just going to select one of them, hit Alt, drag onto the next one. Select the next one, Alt, drag, next one, Alt, drag. This is basically a very standard replace technique. And I feel like when I have to do multiple of these star plates, it's the faster way to get them all in my scene and properly positioned in 3D space. Great, there you go. Now that's the beauty of these organic star fields. So they're all completely different. We don't have any overlapping stars, but they are all completely unique stars. And I believe I extracted 23,350 different stars from NASA, and each one of these just includes about 500 of them. So I don't think any of these two star plates actually have the same stars. But doesn't matter. What we will do is we're just going to be randomizing the position a little bit, and some of them I'm pushing a little bit further into Z space. Some of them I'm moving down a little bit and pushing a bit further into Z space. Maybe I'm even giving this one a little bit of a rotation. And you basically just want to be filling out as much of a dome shape onto your shot. Now we do have this tree over here, which we want to be careful for. And we can always fix that by just creating a new layer with a bit of a feather and just adding that tree back on top. And I think we can leave the last one as it is so that we have a pretty nice cluster in the middle. I'm going to select all of these star plates over here, and I want to add an effect to them. And it's down here under channel, and it's called the set matte effect. Now, here you go. They all have the effect. And right now it's going to be doing something a little bit strange. So I'm going to be turning them off for now. Now what I want to do is create a pretty natural twinkle that goes onto all of these stars. And the way that twinkle actually works is that it's basically the light is refracting and bouncing on all the things that are in between our eyes and the stars themselves. These could be a million different things, but the best way that I found to properly simulate that is by using some fractal noises. So I'm going to go and create a new black solid. I'm going to go down here to noise and grain and add a fractal noise. I'm going to be using right now something like dynamic, and then I'm going to lower the scale to something like 25. And ooh, that's the wrong 25. There you go, 25. Now, if you're familiar with the noises in Cinema 4D, I'm kind of looking for something similar to the FBM noise, a very fine detail map. And I'm going to lower the contrast a little bit and increase the brightness. Now that's our first layer. Now I'm going to create a second layer, a new black solid. And I'm going to add fractal noise. Now I'm going to go for something like dynamic progressive, scale it down to about 50%, and I'm going to increase the contrast quite a lot. There you go. I'm going to increase the brightness. There you go. And now I'm going to set this one to multiply on top of the other one. Here you go. Now I'm going to take these two, I'm going to hit Command-Shift-C to pre-compose those two into a new layer. I'm going to trim it, and basically this will act as our Luma matte. Now, one thing we need to do is I'm going to go in here and we want to animate these fractals. So we can do that by alt-clicking the evolution stopwatch and just typing in time and then the times sign, the times symbol, and then let's say 200. 200 gives you a pretty natural result. And for this one, I'm going to say time times 150, as it's a bit bigger and bigger things usually move slowly. Now, as you can see from this preview, we are creating a pretty strong variation. Now, usually there's nothing more you need to do for this twinkle to work. So we're just gonna go with it and you'll start seeing how this will work. We can keep that layer turned off, and then each one of these star plates we'll now have to change the set matte effect to luminance and take matte from our pre-comp one, which I will quickly rename as our fractal noise. There you go. So this one, okay, well, seems like we have to be doing it manually. Cool. Now, you could also do this by having multiple copies of the fractal noise layer and then keeping it in between each one of these layers and then manually changing the track matte to luma matte. However, I feel like unless you're working in a node-based system, it gets pretty complicated and your layers start becoming pretty messy. Now, we first spent most of our time making sure that we built a solid foundation based on as real of luminance values as we could possibly get. Now, the next thing we want to do is build on top of this to make sure that we manage to get the emotional reaction that we want. Now, to me, this looks correctly exposed, but it's not giving me that, oh, beautiful starry night feeling. So what I would like to do is I'm going to take one of these plates. Now, ideally one that's somewhere center frame. So let's say this plate number 30 over here. And we're going to be emphasizing that one plate, giving you the feeling of there being a North Star or there being a constellation that's more present and more visible right now. So what I will do is I'm going to duplicate this layer. And as you can see, we made some of these stars brighter. Now we're going to be working on these. I'm quickly going to change their color to something like pink. And that pink isn't really what I was expecting, so let's make it fuchsia. There you go. And I'm going to duplicate it one more time. And this time we're going to be playing around a little bit with our blur settings. I'm going to change the aspect ratio to be 0.5 on this one. And let's kind of zoom in so you can see what it is that we're doing. And now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to decrease the blur to be about 5. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create a little bit of a glint or a glare effect. I'm going to duplicate it one more time and I'm going to rotate our bokeh about 90 degrees. Now, if I move back out, you can see we have a few stars that are pretty present, creating that beautiful sparkly look. And the rest are kind of more diffused and subdued and going back into the distance. One more thing I would like to do is I want to create some kind of a stronger glow fall off. So I'm going to duplicate the first of the pink layers. I'm going to increase the camera lens blur to something like 15. I'm going to double it. There you go. Now that is pretty strong, so I'm just going to lower the opacity of that layer to about 50%. And then we should just have a little bit of a glowy feeling to those specific stars. And there you go. That should be about it. This is my preferred way of adding stars into your backplates. I have been doing this quite a lot for our sci-fi film Syntactic Labyrinths, but there it tends to be a bit easier because you're just working with pure blackness and your stars. Now, when it comes to adding stars into your natural shots, just as a recap, be sure to check the exposure of your stars, then build a strong foundation on the realism, and then add on top of it to create the story or the narrative impact that you want to sell. Except for that, remember that wherever you are in real life, there is an atmosphere and there are things in between the stars and the eye of the viewer that will be causing twinkles or that will be causing some volumetric scattering or whatever it is. As a final note, you could even go in here and add a few cloud assets in front and make them move, and that would also be a way to start excluding some of these stars and revealing some of these stars in some more natural and interesting ways. Well, that's it. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for checking out the channel. I'm very happy to see all of you sticking around on this channel. be sure to check out the ArtStation store. You can get this thing for €5.25, and you won't have to worry about your star plates ever again. These are EXR files, high dynamic range. They're pretty large in resolution, and they're all taken from real stars. So yeah, that's it. Thank you very much, and have a great day. Cheers. Bye-bye.